Apache Woman in the Winter Creek, the drifter who saved her life. A Wild West true grit tale. The wind howled across Winter Creek, cutting through the forest like a knife. Snow covered the ground in thick, unbroken sheets, and the trees stood like frozen sentinels, their branches heavy with ice. The sun, low and weak in the sky, cast a pale light over the wilderness, giving the world a cold, ghostly glow. In this harsh and lonely land, Ahayana, a young Apache woman, struggled to keep moving. Her breath came in ragged gasps, puffing clouds into the freezing air, and her feet sank into the deep snow with every step. She had been traveling for days, her journey forced upon her by sudden tragedy. The family she had known, the people who had raised her, had been swept away in a snowstorm that had come without warning. Now, alone and exhausted, Ayana relied only on the lessons she had learned from her tribe, lessons about how to survive when nature seemed determined to destroy you. Her hands were raw and red from the cold, even through the thin gloves she wore. Her clothes, while layered, offered little protection against the biting wind that seemed to find every gap. Yet, she moved with purpose. She had to find shelter, food, and warmth, or she would not survive another night. The creek, which gave the region its name, ran nearby, a frozen ribbon of water that shimmered in the pale sunlight. She knew that the creek could be both a friend and a danger. The water beneath the ice could give her life if she melted snow for drinking, but one false step could mean falling into the icy current and losing everything. Despite her fear, she approached it carefully, her eyes scanning the frozen banks for any sign of a safe crossing. Ayana's mind wandered to memories of her family as she walked. She remembered her mother's gentle voice calling her name in the morning, the warmth of the small fire in their lodge, the laughter of her younger siblings playing in the sun. Those memories were like sparks in the cold darkness, keeping her spirit alive even when her body was tired. But she could not linger in sorrow. The forest demanded her full attention. Every crunch of snow beneath her feet, every sudden crack of ice, reminded her that danger was never far away. Wolves sometimes hunted this region, and though she had rarely seen them close, the sound of distant howls made her pulse quicken. She was small and alone, but she had been taught to move silently, to read the signs of the land, and to trust her instincts. The sun began to dip lower, and the shadows grew longer, stretching across the snow like dark fingers. Ayana knew she could not afford to remain exposed until nightfall. She needed a place to rest, somewhere sheltered from the wind. Her eyes searched the tree line, looking for a hollow, a fallen log, or even a small cave. Finally, she spotted a narrow opening between two large rocks. It was not much, but it offered protection from the wind and snow. She hurried toward it, her legs burning with cold and fatigue. Once inside, she collapsed on the hard ground, pressing herself against the rocks for warmth. She removed her gloves and rubbed her hands together, trying to bring life back into her fingers. Then, carefully, she dug through her small pack of supplies. There was very little, just a few dried berries, a piece of jerky, and a flint for making fire. She knew she had to ration them carefully. She had no idea how long she would be stranded in this frozen wilderness. Using the flint, Ahina managed to start a small fire in the shallow depression of the rock shelter. The flames flickered weakly, but gave off enough heat to warm her fingers and dry the moisture from her clothes. She ate slowly, savoring each bite, knowing that food was precious. As she ate, she listened to the sounds of the forest. The wind groaned through the trees, carrying a scent of pine and ice. Occasionally she heard the soft fall of snow from branches overhead, or the distant crack of ice breaking on the creek. Each sound reminded her that she was still very much in a dangerous place, and that survival depended on awareness, patience, and courage. Hours passed, and the cold continued to press against her. Ahiana knew that she could not stay in the shelter for too long. She had to keep moving, to find a safer place where she could rest more comfortably and gather enough food for the days ahead. She packed her small fire carefully, ensuring that no sparks would start a larger fire in the forest, and continued her journey along the creek. The snow grew deeper, making every step harder than the last. Her boots were soaked, her body trembling despite the layers of clothing, yet her determination never wavered. She thought of the lessons her father had taught her. That courage was not the absence of fear, but the strength to move forward in spite of it. She reminded herself that the land, no matter how cruel, also provided the tools for survival if one knew where to look. As the evening approached, the temperature dropped even further. The creek, now almost completely frozen, glistened under the fading light, reflecting the pink and orange hues of the sunset. Ahayana knew that she needed a plan for the night. There were no settlements nearby, no other people to help her. She was alone, a single figure moving through an endless white wilderness. Her thoughts turned to what lay ahead. The journey through Winter Creek would not be easy. She would have to hunt small animals for food, melt snow for water, and continue finding safe places to rest. But she also knew that she had survived worse storms in her short life, and that her knowledge, courage, and patience could carry her through even the most difficult challenges. Suddenly, a sound caught her attention. A branch snapped somewhere in the distance, and the sound echoed through the silent forest. Ahiana froze, listening carefully. Wolves, perhaps, or another animal searching for food. She remained perfectly still, letting her body become one with the surroundings. Slowly, she scanned the snow-covered ground and trees. The forest was vast and empty, but the sound had reminded her that she was never truly alone in the wilderness. Every living creature was a potential threat, and every movement could mean danger. Yet the sound also reminded her that life continued, that the forest was not entirely hostile, and that survival was possible if she remained alert and patient. Night fell quickly, bringing with it a deep and penetrating cold. Ahiana huddled in her rock shelter, using her arms and legs to shield herself from the wind. The fire had burned low, leaving only a small glow that provided some warmth and comfort. She thought about the days to come, about how she would need to continue traveling, hunting, and gathering food. She thought about her family, her people, and the life she had lost. The memories were painful, but they also gave her strength. She promised herself that she would survive, that she would honor their memory by staying alive and moving forward. In the silence of Winter Creek, surrounded by ice and snow, Ahiana felt a deep connection to the land and to herself. She understood that survival was not just about food and shelter, but about hope, determination, and courage. By the time she finally closed her eyes, she had made a plan for the next day. She would continue along the creek, looking for signs of life, plants, animals, or even other travelers. She would use her knowledge of the forest and the lessons from her tribe to guide her, and she would never give up, no matter how cold, hungry, or lonely she felt. In that moment, Ahiana became more than just a survivor. She became a symbol of resilience, a young woman determined to face the wild, unforgiving world of Winter Creek with courage and strength. The wind continued to howl outside, but inside her small shelter, she found a measure of peace, a spark of hope that would carry her through the long, cold night. The morning air in Winter Creek was sharp and biting. Frost clung to the trees, and every step on the snow crunched loudly, echoing across the frozen valley. The sky was pale, almost colorless, and the sun struggled to warm the land. Far from any settlement, the forest was alive with quiet sounds, the whistle of the wind through the branches, the soft trickle of water beneath the frozen creek, and the occasional distant call of a bird braving the cold. It was here, in this frozen and lonely wilderness, that a drifter named Caleb made his way. He was a man of few words and few attachments, a wanderer who had traveled across the Wild West. His clothes were rugged and worn, his boots scuffed from endless miles, and his eyes were sharp, scanning every detail of the land as he walked. He had survived storms, bandits, and wild animals before, but Winter Creek was proving to be one of the most challenging places he had ever encountered. Caleb had been moving south, following rumors of a rough winter and travelers in need of help. He had heard tales of a place called Winter Creek, a stretch of wilderness where the snow could trap the unprepared and where only the strongest or luckiest could survive. Unlike most people who feared the winter, Caleb found a strange beauty in it, the way the sunlight glinted on ice, the quiet that settled over the forest at dawn, and the challenge it presented. Yet even he knew that surviving alone in this frozen land required caution. Every footprint, every broken branch could tell a story about who had passed this way, and Caleb had learned to read them like a book. That morning, as he walked along the frozen path near the creek, he noticed something unusual. A series of footprints, not deep, but clearly made by someone walking slowly, perhaps struggling through the snow. He paused, kneeling to examine them. They were fresh, and they led toward a cluster of rocks that might hide a shelter. Caleb's instincts told him that someone was nearby, someone who might need help. Meanwhile, Ahiana had spent the night huddled in her rock shelter. She had survived, but barely. The cold had seeped into her bones, and every movement reminded her of the danger around her. As she prepared to leave, she packed her small bundle of belongings, taking only what was essential: a few dried berries, the piece of jerky that had lasted from yesterday, and the flint she had used to make fire. She wrapped herself tightly in her blankets, pulled her hood over her head, and stepped cautiously into the white wilderness. Her eyes scanned the snowy landscape, watching for the thin shadows that might indicate hidden dangers, and her ears were alert for any unusual sound. She was alone, but she was not afraid, at least not completely. Fear was something she had learned to manage. It sharpened her senses, made her careful, and reminded her of what she needed to do to survive. Caleb followed the footprints slowly, keeping to the trees for cover. He was careful not to make any noise that might startle the person ahead. The tracks were uneven, showing that whoever had made them was weak from hunger or exhaustion. Every step he took brought him closer to the shelter. From the way the snow was disturbed, he could tell the person had spent the night there but had recently moved on. The wind shifted suddenly, carrying with it a faint scent of smoke and wood. Caleb's eyes narrowed. A fire, even a small one, meant someone had been alive here recently. Perhaps someone still needed help. He quickened his pace slightly, though cautiously, moving like a shadow through the trees. A hyena trudged along the edge of the creek, scanning the frozen banks for any signs of food or safe places to rest. Her legs ached and her stomach growled, reminding her of the limits of her strength. She knew she needed help, even if she would not admit it to herself. She had survived alone before, but the winter was merciless and the land was unfamiliar. Suddenly, she spotted movement ahead. At first, just a blur against the white and gray of the forest, but then clearly a figure, moving with purpose and care. Her heart leapt, not entirely with fear, but with cautious hope. Could this be another person? Someone who might help her? Or was it a stranger who might bring danger? She hesitated, unsure whether to call out or hide. Her instincts told her to wait and watch, to judge the intentions of the stranger before revealing herself. Caleb had also noticed the small figure moving near the creek. He slowed, crouching behind a tree, observing her. She was young, weak, and clearly exhausted, moving slowly through the snow as if every step required effort. Caleb could see the signs of frostbite on her fingers and the wear on her clothing. He knew instantly that she would not survive long without food, warmth, or shelter. He had no weapons drawn, no intentions to threaten. Instead, he moved carefully, making himself visible only after a moment, allowing her to see him clearly. "You don't have to hide," he said in a calm voice, careful not to startle her. His tone was gentle but firm, like someone used to dealing with frightened travelers. Ahiana froze, her instincts screaming caution, but something in his voice told her that he meant no harm. She stayed where she was, watching him closely. Her mind raced. Should she approach? Could she trust him? Trust was difficult to give, especially to strangers in the Wild West, where danger often came unexpectedly. Yet she also knew that alone she could not survive for long. Her stomach ached, her body trembled, and the snow made every movement slow and painful. Finally, she took a cautious step forward, then another, her eyes never leaving his. Caleb remained still, allowing her to make the choice. Slowly she approached, each step an effort, until she stood a few feet away from him. She could see the kindness in his eyes and the strength in his stance. He did not carry any weapons threateningly. His hands were empty, open, and calm. "Are you hurt?" Caleb asked. His voice carried concern. Ahiana nodded slightly, shivering. I'm cold, hungry," she admitted, her voice barely audible over the wind. Caleb nodded, understanding. He reached into his pack and pulled out some dried meat and a small piece of hard bread. "Eat this," he said. "It will help." She hesitated, then took the food with trembling hands. The taste was simple but nourishing, and she ate slowly, grateful yet still cautious. Caleb watched quietly, giving her space. He knew that trust could not be forced. It had to grow naturally, especially with someone who had survived as much as she had. Once she had eaten, Caleb gestured toward a more secure area nearby, a small hollowed-out area under a cluster of rocks that would provide shelter from the wind. "You can rest there," he said. "It's safer." Ahiana nodded again, understanding that this was her chance to recover. She moved carefully toward the shelter, her legs stiff and weak, while Caleb followed at a respectful distance. Once inside, she curled up as best she could, still wary but beginning to feel the warmth of safety. Caleb started a small fire outside, making sure it was contained but enough to provide heat. The smoke rose gently into the sky, a sign that someone was nearby, but also a beacon of hope. For the first time in days, Ahiana felt a measure of relief. She was not alone. She was not completely at the mercy of Winter Creek. Someone had come to help her, someone who understood survival in the wilderness. The hours passed slowly. Caleb kept the fire alive, watching the surrounding forest while Ahiana rested. He learned her story gradually, how she had lost her family in the snowstorm, how she had been traveling alone, and how she had survived using her tribe's skills. In turn, he shared a little about his own life, a drifter who had wandered from town to town, surviving on skill, instinct, and sometimes luck. They spoke quietly, the wind outside carrying their voices into the forest. Despite the differences in their backgrounds, they found common ground in survival. Both had known loneliness, hardship, and the constant challenge of living in a land that could be both beautiful and deadly. Night began to fall again, and the temperature dropped even further. The fire crackled, sending sparks into the air, while the wind howled around the rocks. Hyana, feeling some measure of trust and safety, allowed herself to relax slightly. She knew that Caleb would watch over her, and she realized that she could not have survived another day alone in the wilderness. The drifter had appeared at the right moment, turning her despair into hope. As she drifted into a light sleep, the fire's warmth surrounding her, she felt a bond forming between them. One not built on words alone, but on shared survival, mutual respect, and the unspoken understanding of life in the harshest of conditions. By the time the moon rose, casting silver light across the snow, Ahiana and Caleb had settled into a quiet rhythm. She rested while he kept watch, both aware of the dangers of Winter Creek, but also aware of the strange fortune that had brought them together. They had met by chance, yet it felt like destiny. Two souls in the wild, learning to trust each other, relying on courage and skill to face the frozen world around them. The story of their encounter would mark the beginning of a journey that neither had anticipated, a journey of survival, friendship, and discovery in the unforgiving heart of the Wild West. The next morning, Winter Creek was bathed in soft light, the snow sparkling like a field of tiny diamonds. The wind had calmed somewhat, but the cold was still sharp and unforgiving. Ahiana stirred, stretching her stiff limbs, feeling the soreness that came from days of struggling through deep snow. The warmth of the small fire from the night before lingered, giving her a faint sense of comfort, though she knew that the day ahead would test her strength once again. Caleb was already awake, tending to the fire and keeping a careful watch on the surrounding trees. He had moved quietly, almost like a shadow, checking the frozen creek and scanning the forest for any signs of danger. Despite his rugged appearance and long years of wandering, there was a careful patience in him, an understanding that survival depended not just on strength, but on observation and caution. Ahiana sat beside the fire, warming her hands. She glanced at Caleb, noticing how he worked with skill and care. His movements were deliberate, practiced, and precise. Watching him made her realize how much she could learn from this man, how his experience in the wilderness could complement her own knowledge of survival. She had grown up learning the ways of the Apache, tracking animals, reading the signs of the land, and knowing which plants could sustain life. But even with these skills, the harsh winter of Winter Creek was testing her limits. Together they would be stronger, more capable of facing the challenges that lay ahead. "Do you know how to track animals?" Caleb asked suddenly, breaking the quiet. His voice was calm, steady, not commanding, but inviting her to share her knowledge. Ahiana nodded, her eyes lighting up slightly. "Yes," she said. "I can follow the signs of the forest. Broken branches, footprints, even the smell of the snow can tell me where an animal has passed." Caleb smiled faintly. "Good. We'll need that. Food is scarce, and the winter will not wait for us." With that, they began their first real task together, finding something to eat. Their approach was quiet, careful, like dancers moving through the white expanse. Every crunch of snow beneath their feet echoed in the silent forest, and every shadow seemed to hold a hidden threat. As they moved through the trees, Ahiana pointed out subtle signs of life, a bent twig here, a small patch of disturbed snow there, tiny clues that an animal had passed this way recently. Caleb followed closely, learning from her gestures, her subtle ways of noticing details that might escape a stranger. They moved as a team, communicating with gestures, soft whispers, and shared glances. It was not just about survival. It was about trust, and that trust was growing with every step. For Ahiana, having someone to watch her back was a relief. For Caleb, seeing her knowledge and skill gave him a newfound respect for her resilience and intelligence. After some time, they came upon a small clearing where the tracks of a rabbit were visible in the snow. Ahiana knelt, examining them carefully. "It's fresh," she said, her voice low but confident. "If we are careful, we can catch it. It may be our only meal today, but it will help." Caleb nodded, crouching beside her. They'd prepared quietly, setting up a simple trap using their combined skills. The rabbit, unaware of their presence, moved cautiously across the snow, sniffing the air. Ahiana's heart raced, not from fear, but from anticipation. This was more than hunting. It was a test of patience, knowledge, and cooperation. After a tense moment, the trap worked. The rabbit was caught, and they had food. Caleb handled it with care, and Ahiana prepared it for cooking, using a small fire they built together. The smell of roasted meat filled the crisp winter air, warming them and lifting their spirits. After the meal, they rested briefly, sitting by the fire. Ahayana looked at Caleb and realized how much she had already learned from him. He was calm under pressure, resourceful, and able to make quick decisions when danger arose. At the same time, she saw that he respected her knowledge, never dismissing her ideas or instincts. It was a partnership born of necessity, but it was also forming into something deeper, a mutual understanding of survival, trust, and respect. They spoke quietly about the forest, about the dangers of Winter Creek, and about the few signs of other travelers they had noticed. Each story, each shared observation, strengthened their bond and made them more prepared for the trials that awaited. The afternoon brought new challenges. As they continued along the creek, the terrain grew more difficult. The snow deepened and hidden patches of ice made every step treacherous. They had to move slowly, testing each area before stepping. Caleb offered his hand when Ahayana slipped, and she returned the gesture when he stumbled on a hidden root. They laughed quietly at their minor slips, the sound bright and unusual in the quiet forest, yet it reminded them both of their humanity. Even in the harshest winter, moments of lightness could ease the weight of exhaustion and fear. They found a frozen stream and carefully broke patches of ice to collect water, melting it over their small fire. Each small success, finding food, making water, staying warm, was a victory, reinforcing their determination to survive. As evening approached, the temperature dropped further. Clouds gathered in the sky, promising another storm. Ayana and Caleb realized they needed to find a more secure place to rest for the night. They came upon a small grove of pine trees, the branches heavy with snow. Caleb led Ahayana to a hollow formed by fallen logs and thick brush, a natural shelter that offered protection from the wind. They worked together to clear space, building a small fire carefully and covering themselves with layers of clothing and blankets. The forest outside was quiet but unpredictable, and both knew that danger could appear at any moment. Wild animals, shifting snow, or the elements themselves. Yet inside their small shelter they felt a measure of security, a brief reprieve from the harshness of the winter. During the night they shared more about themselves. Ayana spoke of her family, of the traditions of her people, and of the hardship she had endured. Caleb shared stories of his travels, towns he had seen, storms he had survived, and lessons he had learned from the land. They did not speak much of fear or weakness. Instead, they spoke of strength, strategy, and endurance. These conversations were more than storytelling. They were lessons in resilience, teaching each other skills and insights that would help them face the challenges ahead. With every word, the trust between them deepened, and Ahayana felt a rare sense of comfort in the presence of someone who understood the trials of the wilderness. The following days tested them further. The snow grew deeper, and storms swept across the creek, blanketing the landscape in white and making navigation difficult. Yet Ayana and Caleb pressed on, relying on each other's strengths. She taught him to read subtle signs in the snow, broken branches, animal tracks, and faint markings that could indicate nearby danger or opportunity. He taught her how to move quietly, how to make traps, and how to maintain a fire in conditions that would extinguish it in minutes. Together, they became a team, two individuals whose skills complemented each other perfectly. They learned to anticipate the challenges of Winter Creek, preparing for storms before they arrived and rationing food and water carefully. One afternoon, as they navigated a steep ridge, they encountered a small pack of wolves. The creatures were thin from the winter, their eyes sharp and cautious. Ahayana froze, instinctively drawing from what she had learned from her people. Caleb stepped beside her calmly, placing a protective hand near her shoulder, signaling both caution and reassurance. The wolves watched them for a tense moment before retreating into the forest, likely seeking easier prey. The encounter left them shaken but more alert. It reminded them that the wilderness was alive, unpredictable, and dangerous, and that their survival depended on constant vigilance. Yet, it also reinforced their confidence in one another. They had faced the threat together and survived, their partnership proving stronger than either could be alone. As night fell, the stars emerged in the clear winter sky. Ahayana and Caleb sat by their small fire, exhausted but satisfied. They shared a quiet meal, reflecting on the day and the progress they had made. Ahayana realized how much she had learned from Caleb in such a short time, and Caleb recognized the depth of her knowledge and resilience. The fire's warmth, the quiet beauty of the snow-covered forest, and the shared sense of survival created a bond that words could barely describe. They were no longer just two travelers crossing Winter Creek. They were companions, united by circumstance, courage, and trust. Together, they were stronger, wiser, and better prepared for the challenges that lay ahead. The night passed peacefully, the fire burning low but steadily, keeping the darkness at bay. Ahayana, curled beneath blankets and leaning against Caleb for warmth, felt a sense of hope she had not known for days. In the harsh frozen wilderness of Winter Creek, she had found not only survival but companionship. And though the coming days promised more danger, she knew that as long as they faced it together, they could endure anything. The partnership that had begun in caution and uncertainty had grown into a powerful alliance, one that would see them through storms. Winter Creek had grown even colder. The sun barely broke through the thick gray clouds, casting a muted silver light over the forest. Snow fell steadily, coating the trees and covering the trails they had worked so hard to follow. Ayana and Caleb had grown accustomed to the bitter cold, but the winter seemed determined to test them again and again. Each morning brought a new challenge: icy rivers, deep snow, and hidden dangers under every drift. Yet their bond had grown stronger, their trust in each other more solid. They moved with caution, speaking quietly, sharing knowledge, and relying on the skills that had kept them alive. It was a rhythm they had established, a careful balance of patience, skill, and courage. One afternoon, as the wind howled through the tall pine trees and the snow fell in thick, almost blinding sheets, they came to the banks of the frozen river. The water beneath was swift, dark, and treacherous, hidden beneath a fragile layer of ice. Caleb studied it carefully, testing the edges with his boot. "We need to cross here," he said, his voice low but steady. "The other path will take us too far out of the way, and the storm is coming." Ahiana nodded, her mind alert. She understood the danger. Ice could give way without warning, and a fall into the freezing water could be fatal. Yet they had no choice. They had to move forward. Together they began to carefully step onto the ice, testing each section before trusting it with their weight. The first few steps were cautious but successful. The ice held firm beneath their boots, and they moved slowly across the river. Then, without warning, a crack ran beneath Ayana's foot. The ice splintered with a sharp, alarming sound. She froze, heart pounding, and looked down to see a thin sheet giving way. Before she could react, the ice broke completely, plunging her into the freezing water. The shock of the cold was immediate and overwhelming. Her breath caught in her throat, and the icy water pulled at her legs, dragging her down. Panic surged, but instinct took over. She kicked and flailed, trying to grab anything solid, and her fingers found the jagged edge of the broken ice. The cold burned her skin, her muscles ached, and she struggled to pull herself up, but the river's current was strong. Caleb reacted instantly. Without hesitation, he dropped to his knees on the solid ice and reached toward her, grabbing her arm firmly. "Hold on!" he shouted over the roar of the wind and the sound of breaking ice. His hands were strong and steady, and he anchored himself with careful precision, digging his boots into the snow. Ahiana clutched his hand, fighting against the current and the icy water that threatened to pull her under. Together they strained against the force of the river, Caleb pulling with all his strength while Ayana kicked and clawed her way towards safety. The minutes stretched like hours, each second filled with danger, adrenaline, and determination. Neither gave up. Neither would let the other fall. Finally, with a combination of Caleb's strength and Ayana's determination, they reached the solid edge of the ice. Gasping for breath, shivering violently, Ayana collapsed onto the snow, water dripping from her hair and clothes. Caleb knelt beside her, wrapping her in a dry blanket he had carried. He checked her carefully, rubbing her hands, feet, and arms to restore warmth. "You're okay now," he said firmly. "You're safe." Ayana's teeth chattered, but a faint smile appeared on her face. She looked at him, gratitude and respect shining in her eyes. This moment, terrifying as it had shown her not only the danger of Winter Creek, but the depth of Caleb's courage and reliability. He had saved her life without hesitation, and in doing so had strengthened the bond they shared. After a while, once she had stopped shivering and the immediate danger had passed, they sat beside a small fire Caleb had made, drying their clothes as best they could. The river continued to flow nearby, dark and relentless, a reminder of the hazards they faced. They did not speak much at first, both too tired and shaken by the experience. But gradually, Ahiana found her voice. "I thought I might not make it," she admitted softly. Caleb shook his head, his expression serious but calm. "You did," he said simply. "And you will. You're stronger than you realize." His words were more than reassurance. They were a lesson. Survival depended on courage, persistence, and the ability to trust others when the moment demanded it. Ahiana nodded, understanding fully that she was not just being saved, she was learning, growing, and becoming more capable with every challenge. The next few days were spent recovering and continuing cautiously along the creek. The ice and snow made every movement difficult, and the recent near disaster had reminded them of the importance of vigilance. They moved more slowly, choosing paths carefully and checking the ice before stepping. Their survival depended not only on skill and knowledge, but on cooperation. Caleb taught Ayana how to anchor herself and move in tandem across fragile surfaces, while she taught him subtle signs in the snow that indicated thin ice or hidden danger. Each lesson was a matter of life and death, and both took them seriously. Together, they became more than just two travelers. They became a team, capable of facing the harshest conditions Winter Creek could throw at them. One evening, as they settled in a small hollow sheltered by trees, the storm returned with renewed strength. Snow fell thickly, and the wind whipped through the forest like a living thing. Caleb built a strong fire, covering it carefully to prevent sparks from flying, while Ayana prepared food from the small cache they had managed to gather. They ate in silence, aware that noise could attract predators, but also feeling the quiet comfort of having survived another day. The storm raged outside, but inside their shelter they found warmth and security in each other's presence. Ayana realized how much she had come to rely on Caleb, not just for survival, but as a companion and protector. She had learned to trust him completely, and that trust was a source of strength that helped her endure the cold and danger. As the storm subsided, they emerged to find Winter Creek transformed. The snow was deeper, covering the forest in an almost unbroken white sheet, and the creek was mostly frozen, with only a few dark currents visible beneath the ice. The landscape was beautiful but treacherous, reminding them that survival required constant awareness. They continued their journey, moving carefully, using their combined skills to navigate safely. Ayana's knowledge of tracking and survival guided them, while Caleb's experience and quick thinking protected them from unseen dangers. They found small animals, gathered edible plants, and made sure to keep warm and rested. Every small success was celebrated quietly, a recognition that life in Winter Creek was fragile, yet full of opportunities for those who were skilled and determined. A week passed, and their partnership deepened. Ayana began to see Caleb not just as a protector, but as a teacher, companion, and friend. She admired his courage, his patience, and his ability to remain calm under pressure. Caleb, in turn, respected Ayana's intelligence, bravery, and instinct. He saw that her survival skills, knowledge of the land, and sharp instincts made her an equal. Not someone to be protected, but someone to work with. Their journey was more than physical survival. It was a lesson in trust, resilience, and mutual respect. They began to anticipate each other's needs, moving with unspoken coordination, understanding each other's strengths and limits. One afternoon, while traveling along a ridge overlooking the frozen creek, they encountered another hazard, a sudden snowdrift that had hidden a crevice in the ground. Ayana noticed it first, pointing it out with a quiet gesture. Caleb stopped just in time, avoiding a potentially deadly fall. They laughed softly at their near miss, a small moment of relief in the midst of continuous challenges. These shared experiences, the moments of danger and survival, bonded them further. They were no longer just individuals struggling to survive. They were a unit, capable of facing the wild and unpredictable winter together. Each day, each obstacle, only strengthened their partnership, preparing them for the ultimate challenges that lay ahead. As night fell, they set up camp once more, the cold pressing in from all sides. Caleb made a fire and helped Ayana get warm, while she carefully prepared their small meal. They sat close together, sharing the fire's warmth and the comfort of human presence in the lonely wilderness. Ayana reflected on the events of the past week, the near-fatal fall through the ice, the dangers of the snowdrifts, and the constant battle to survive. She realized that she had grown stronger, braver, and wiser. She had faced death and emerged alive, thanks in part to Caleb, but also because of her own courage and skill. Survival was not just about physical strength, it was about resilience, learning from mistakes and trusting those who had proven themselves worthy. Winter Creek had never felt so merciless. The wind cut across the icy landscape, carrying tiny shards of snow that stung the skin and made every movement difficult. Trees groaned under the weight of frost, and the frozen creek stretched before Ayana and Caleb like a silver, treacherous ribbon. Though they had grown accustomed to the hardships of this wilderness, they knew that Winter Creek demanded constant vigilance. Every step could hide danger, and every frozen surface could betray them. Their journey had brought them to a particularly dangerous stretch of river where the ice was thin, hidden beneath a layer of snow that sparkled deceptively in the weak winter sun. Ayana's eyes scanned the frozen surface as Caleb tested it carefully with a long branch. "We need to cross here," he said, his voice calm but firm. "The other path takes us too far out of the way, and the storm could reach us before nightfall." Ayana nodded, feeling both fear and resolve. She knew the river could be fatal if the ice broke. Yet hesitation would cost them valuable daylight. Together they began to step onto the ice, testing each section before trusting their weight. Their steps were slow, deliberate, and synchronized. Each small crack or groan of the ice made their hearts race, but neither spoke much, relying on instinct and experience instead. The first part of the crossing went smoothly, but then disaster struck. A sharp crack rang out beneath Ayana's foot, loud in the quiet of the winter forest. She froze, panic surging through her chest, and looked down to see the fragile ice splintering beneath her. Before she could react, the surface gave way, and she plunged into the icy water. Shock hit her like a physical blow. The cold was unbearable, immediately stealing her breath and making her limbs feel heavy and unresponsive. The river's current tugged at her, threatening to drag her under. Snow and ice pressed against her as she struggled, and fear flared sharply. She kicked, thrashed, and clawed at the ice, desperate to pull herself out. Her fingers were numb, her teeth chattered, and she felt the terrifying pull of the freezing water. Caleb reacted without hesitation. He dropped to his knees at the edge of the ice, digging his boots into the snow to anchor himself. "Hold on!" he shouted, his voice carrying over the roar of the wind and water. His hand shot out and grasped hers just as her strength began to wane. Ahayana clutched it desperately. Caleb pulled with all his might, bracing himself, straining against the ice's slick surface. Together they battled the cold, the current, and exhaustion. Every second felt like an eternity, but Caleb's steady grip and her own determination allowed them to inch toward safety. His face was tense, focused, and unwavering, a rock of calm in the storm of their crisis. Ahayana's heart pounded, not only from the terror but from the realization that survival depended entirely on trust and cooperation. With an effort that seemed impossible, Caleb finally pulled Ahayana out of the icy water. She collapsed onto the snow, shivering violently, water dripping from her clothes and hair. Caleb wrapped her in a dry blanket, rubbing her arms, legs, and hands to restore warmth. "You're okay," he said firmly. "You're safe." The words were simple, but they carried a weight of reassurance and strength. Ahayana's body trembled uncontrollably, but her spirit began to stabilize. She looked at Caleb, her eyes wide with gratitude and relief. This moment, terrifying and overwhelming as it had been, had also deepened the bond between them. He had saved her life without hesitation, and in doing so he had earned her complete trust. Once they had rested for a while, the two of them began drying their wet clothes as best they could. Caleb showed Ayana how to wrap herself to retain warmth, how to conserve energy, and how to prepare a fire even under challenging conditions. Ayana, for her part, shared knowledge of survival she had learned from her Apache tribe, how to recognize signs of approaching storms, how to judge which areas were safer for shelter, and how to read the landscape for hidden dangers. Together, their skills complemented each other perfectly. They were no longer simply surviving individually. They were a team, learning from one another, planning for every step, and preparing for the next challenge Winter Creek might throw at them. Over the following days, their journey became even more careful. They crossed streams and snow-covered slopes with caution, using ropes and branches to test surfaces before stepping. Caleb taught Ayana techniques for anchoring herself on ice and snow, while she showed him subtle signs of weak ground or hidden crevices in the snow. Their communication became more intuitive. They learned to understand each other's silent gestures, anticipating actions and coordinating movements without speaking aloud. The cold remained unforgiving, and the occasional howl of wolves or the distant sound of falling snow reminded them that danger was ever present. Yet, with every step, every carefully planned action, they grew stronger together. One afternoon, while traversing a ridge overlooking the frozen river, they encountered another hazard, a sudden snowdrift that covered a hidden crevice. Ahayana noticed the depression first, signaling Caleb to stop. He shifted carefully to avoid the trap, and together they navigated the area. The near miss reminded them of how dangerous the forest could be, and how essential their teamwork had become. They shared a quiet laugh, a brief moment of relief in an otherwise tense and dangerous environment. That laughter, small as it was, strengthened their spirits and reminded them that hope and courage could exist even in the harshest conditions. By nightfall, they had found a small grove of pine trees where the wind was slightly less severe. Caleb built a secure fire, careful to protect it from the strong gusts, while Ahayana prepared a meal from their modest supplies. They ate in silence at first, allowing the storm outside to rage without distraction, then spoke quietly about the day's experiences. Ahayana realized how much she relied on Caleb, not only for protection but for guidance and companionship. He, in turn, respected her intelligence, bravery, and keen observation. Each shared story, each lesson in survival, and each successful step across dangerous terrain strengthened the bond that had formed in the midst of adversity. As the night wore on, they sat close to the fire, reflecting on what had happened. A hyena's near-death experience in the frozen river had taught her the fragility of life and the importance of trust. Caleb reminded her that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to act despite it. They spoke of their past hardships, their hopes, and the challenges yet to come. The storm outside seemed endless, but inside their small shelter they found warmth, safety, and hope. The night passed with both of them alert yet resting, knowing that the coming days would require vigilance, cooperation, and the strength of their growing bond. The frozen river, now behind them, became a symbol of their survival, not just of the cold and danger of Winter Creek, but of the power of trust, courage, and partnership. They had faced death together and emerged stronger. Their respect for each other deepened. As they prepared to continue their journey, Ahiana and Caleb knew that the challenges of Winter Creek were far from over, but together they were capable of facing them. Their partnership had evolved beyond necessity into a true alliance, built on skill, bravery, and shared determination. Ring approached slowly in Winter Creek. The wind became less harsh, and the snow began to soften, revealing the frozen forest beneath. Small patches of green appeared where the first signs of new life were pushing through. For Ahiana and Caleb, the changing season was a signal of hope. They had endured the coldest, harshest part of the winter, survived frozen rivers, snowstorms, and treacherous ice, and emerged stronger. Their bond, forged through shared hardship and mutual trust, was unbreakable. The forest that had once seemed hostile now felt alive with possibility, a reminder that survival and renewal were always connected. Ahiana walked along the creek with renewed energy. Her movements were confident, her eyes alert but no longer clouded by fear. She had grown stronger, both physically and mentally, from the days spent battling Winter Creek's relentless challenges. She thought of her family and her tribe, remembering the lessons they had taught her about courage, perseverance, and respect for the land. Those lessons, combined with the experience she had gained with Caleb, made her feel capable of facing anything. Caleb, walking beside her, had become more than a companion. He was a mentor, a protector, and a friend. Together, they had learned to read the signs of the forest, to anticipate danger, and to find sustenance in the harshest conditions. Their journey took them further along Winter Creek, through frozen valleys and over ridges now softened by the early signs of spring. Small animals reappeared, and the birds returned, filling the air with sound and color. Ahiana and Caleb carefully gathered food, melting snow for water, and finding safe places to rest. Each day brought new challenges, but they faced them with skill and coordination. They moved with an unspoken understanding, anticipating each other's needs, protecting each other from hidden dangers, and sharing knowledge that ensured their continued survival. Winter Creek was no longer a place of fear. It was a landscape that had taught them resilience, resourcefulness, and the strength of partnership. One morning, they came across a small clearing where the sun reflected off the melting snow, creating shimmering patches of light. Ahiana paused, taking in the beauty of the scene. "It's amazing," she said softly, her voice filled with awe. "After all the cold, all the danger, this is what we've been working toward." Caleb smiled, nodding. "Winter Creek is tough," he said, "but it rewards those who survive." They sat for a while, enjoying the warmth of the sun and the calm after months of hardship. It was a moment of reflection, a quiet celebration of their journey and an acknowledgement of the courage that had carried them this far. Their time together was drawing to a natural end. Caleb the drifter had always known that his path would eventually take him elsewhere. Ahiana, however, had a new understanding of her strength and resilience. She no longer saw herself solely as someone who needed saving. She was a survivor, a woman capable of navigating the wilderness on her own if necessary, yet the bond they had forged could not be undone. They had become partners in the truest sense, sharing danger, hope, and triumph in equal measure. As they prepared to part ways, there was a mutual respect and unspoken acknowledgement of the role each had played in the other's survival and growth. Caleb prepared his horse, ready to continue his journey across the west. Ahiana stood beside him, her eyes reflecting both gratitude and sadness at the farewell. "Thank you," she said simply, "for everything." Caleb placed a hand on her shoulder, a gesture of reassurance and friendship. "You don't need thanks," he replied. "You've proven your strength, and you'll continue to do so. Winter Creek has tested you, and you've passed. Remember that?" Ahiana nodded, understanding that their paths would diverge, but the lessons, courage, and trust they had shared would remain with her forever. As Caleb rode off into the horizon, disappearing among the trees and distant hills, Ahiana turned to face the creek and the forest that had been both a challenge and a teacher. She felt a sense of freedom she had not known before, a freedom born of survival, courage, and self-discovery. The creek that had once threatened her life was now a symbol of strength and renewal. She would continue her journey, carrying the knowledge, resilience, and hope that Winter Creek had given her. Every step she took was a testament to the spirit of survival, the power of trust, and the enduring strength of human courage. Hayana's journey back to her roots was filled with purpose and determination. She navigated the forest with confidence, her senses sharp and her skills refined. The lessons she had learned alongside Caleb, the importance of observation, strategy, and trust, guided her every action. She collected food, found safe paths, and took care to preserve her energy while moving through the thawing wilderness. The once frozen forest now offered signs of life at every turn, and she felt a deep connection to the land, realizing that survival was not only about enduring hardships, but also about understanding, respecting, and learning from the natural world. By the time she emerged from Winter Creek into a more open landscape, the sun was high and the air was filled with warmth and the promise of new beginnings. Ahayana paused, looking back at the forest that had been both adversary and teacher. She smiled, knowing that she had not only survived but grown stronger, wiser, and more capable than she had ever imagined. Her journey with Caleb had been a turning point, a chapter of resilience, trust, and courage that would remain with her for the rest of her life. She continued forward, ready to face whatever lay ahead, carrying with her the spirit of survival and the lessons of the wild.